The sighting of an endangered northern right whale in Canada halted for temporarily a lobster fishery near Prince Edward Island. Fishermen are not happy, and we're going to talk about it on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, what you can do to speak up for the ocean, and how you can live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Department of Fisheries Oceans that asked the lobster fishers in a portion of Lobster Fishing Area 24, which is a certain region within the area, to remove their gear within the next 96 hours due to the sighting of a North Atlantic right whale, which is an endangered species. So the closure is limited to about 10 fathoms, which is about 18 meters. Multiply that by 3, you get your feet, and depth in feet. And fisheries are allowed to continue in fishing in shallower waters than 10 fathoms. So the closure will last about 15 days unless there are no further whale sightings within the affected areas within a certain span region. Now, unfortunately, the fishers are not happy about this. This is peak lobster season, and so this is affecting their business. This is affecting their income. However, there's this balance, and we've talked about this before on the podcast, where you have this balance of, look, we have northern right whales, which are an endangered species in Canada and in the U.S. There are less than 400 of them, less than 100 breeders, I guess, and it's one of those things where it's like you have to pick one or the other. And right now, many of the organizations, many of the departments, especially fisheries and oceans, are picking the endangered right whales because nobody wants to be responsible for killing another right whale, northern right whale. Now, you're probably wondering, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, is why would lobster fishermen be worried, or the government be worried about lobster fisheries killing northern right whales? The major things that northern right whales have been affected by have been ship strikes, as well as fisheries entanglement, which means fishing lines from crab pots or lobster pots that, so the way it works, the way the lobster fisheries work is the lobster pots get put down, let down like a certain number of feet, and the lobster pots will just sit there with bait for a long time. Now, there's a line that goes from the lobster pot all the way to the surface, from the depths of the surface, with a buoy on the top, so the lobsterman can figure out, hey, this is where I put my lobster pot. Here's a buoy. I'm going to put a GPS on it, and I'm going to go out to that buoy, but it's going to be easier to see if that buoy's on top. But it has to be attached to something, and that's where you get that fisheries line. Now, those lines are essentially ropes, and what happens is a lot of whales will come through, and they won't see those lines. And so that the whale essentially swims through the lines, gets entangled in the lines, and can't take the line off of their body as they swim through. Eventually, what happens, the line will start to cut into the skin, and they can get an infection if they can't get that line off, and it doesn't allow that cut to heal. These are pretty significant cuts, and this is what's been a good part of sort of the lobster fisheries and sort of the entanglements and the killings of northern right whales. Ship strikes is another big one, maybe even bigger in the recent years. And that's essentially, the northern right whales are known to sort of hover at the top or just below the surface, so they're hard to detect. And then the shipping, sort of the ships that are come through for shipping are essentially running into them. It's hard to see, and the mitigation around that, the answer to that, or the management around that, has been dedicated shipping lanes for shipping ships, like shipping containers and other ships, so that they have to take in certain regions, especially in the U.S. I think they also have it in Canada. And the reason why they do that is it's easier to monitor the ships. They know exactly where the ships are going. They know they can track some of the whales, and they can, these shipping lanes have probably been areas that these whales do not frequent, right? Here's the thing, though. This is the first time, really, that the northern right whales, not first time, recently, the northern right whales have come higher or more north into Canada. It was usually off the northeast coast of the U.S. that they would kind of stay around and down the southeast. However, they have come up into the Gulf of St. Lawrence for the past number of years. I believe it started in 2016, 2017. 2017 was the largest death count or mortality count of northern right whales in a long time. They found probably about 17 in the areas that they frequent, and of course that's the ones that they found. They didn't get any that sunk down to the depths or were eaten or anything like that. These are the ones that were found either along a beach or a shoreline, or they found them in the ocean. Not easy to find. So we're saying 17, but it could have been more. And then since then, it hasn't been terrible. But the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has taken action, or since then have taken action to reduce the amount of problems that could arise from northern right whales and other like shipping and fisheries. And so for the shipping, at one point, they reduced the speed of the ships from 20 knots to 10 knots within the Gulf of St. Lawrence at certain times of the year. That kind of got lifted fairly quickly after the season, and then I haven't heard if those shipping speeds or boat speeds have been reduced or continued to be put back in place. I'm not sure if that reduction has happened or if that continues to happen. I'll have to check that. Now, with the shipping, with the fisheries in the U.S., a lot of it made the news probably in the last few months. A couple of the seafood certification programs, so Seafood Watch, as well as the Marine Stewardship Council, have removed their sustainability sort of label for lobster fisheries in Maine due to the fact that lobster fisheries could affect the endangered northern right whale. And so the lobster fishermen were like, hold on a second. Can they actually do this? Is this something that can actually happen? Because we haven't seen or recorded a death of a northern right whale, or any whale for that matter, from lobster fisheries. That's what they claimed. I have no idea if that's true or not. That's just what they've claimed. Now, the researchers and people who have knowledge of marine mammals always estimate that there are a certain number of whales that are not found that are dead from fishing entanglement. It's bound to happen apparently, or it can't. There's a high likability. There's a high probability. I apologize. There's a high probability that this could happen, and so when that happens, or when we don't find something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen, and that I think is the concern in the U.S. In Canada, however, there have been areas that have been shut down. Crab pots, fisheries, lobster fisheries in certain areas have been delayed, or the granting of fishing has been removed until the fishing council or the fishing union body can prove that their crab pots or lobster pots will not affect marine mammals. That's sort of where we're at with that. There's some fisheries that have still been shut down. And here in this case, we've seen a temporary closure of, because of a whale sighting of the lobster fisheries in Prince Edward Island during peak season of grabbing lobsters. Now, the reason why there's seasons is the fact that there are only certain times you can gain access to fishing for lobster. That has to do with a lot of management and quotas that are put in place for lobster fisheries by Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and the fishing unions and all the fishing communities have to abide by those rules. So when they're able to fish, especially during peak season, it's a big deal for them. They need to be able to have this so that they can actually do things with their money. They can survive and they can pay for bills and things like that. So I definitely feel for these fishers who are trying to just take advantage of the peak season, take advantage of the season, and be able to fish for lobster. And because of one sighting of a whale, it's difficult on the fishing community. I'm sure they're not happy about it. With that said, there are a lot of fishers who work with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to ensure that they do not harm the ocean. They don't harm aspects of the ocean. They don't overfish and things like that. So there's a delicate balance between sustainable fishing of lobster, as well as, harming the environment. And fishers often get a bad rap for that. And I feel like I've interviewed fishers before for this podcast, especially around Prince Edward Island and like around the Northumberland Strait. And it's a difficult situation for them. They definitely feel a pinch oftentimes. And so it's a real conundrum here of shutting it down. But because the northern right whales are so precious, and because of their status, their species at risk status of endangered species, it's a difficult situation to manage. They have to take the northern right whales have to take priority in this case. Now, the chair of the PEI Lobster Fishing Lobster Marketing Board expressed concern about the economic consequences and called for alternative solutions to address the issue of whale interactions. So, how can we? Now, the article did note that that there haven't been any reported instances of right whales getting caught in lobster fishing gear in this area, which is great. Like I said before, though, doesn't mean it hasn't happened in the past, or doesn't mean that it cannot happen. The management here is being very cautious, and I get why they're being so cautious. The key here is, how are we going to have to manage this in the future? And just like the article mentioned, just like the PEI, Prince Edward Island Lobster Marketing Board, expressed, are there alternatives to this type of management? Do they have to shut down and remove all their lobster pots during this time because of these northern right whales have come in to sort of just hang out, and how long are they going to be there? That's the other case, right? So it's a we're going to have to find new management. I don't know what what that management would be. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. If you want to DM me at How to Protect the Ocean, I would love to hear what you think the management alternative should be for this shutdown, this temporary shutdown. Now, this happened on May 19th, so it's been a couple of days. I haven't seen an update, but there is an interactive map, which I'll link to, it's in the article that I'll link to, that you can look for, and you can see where these sightings are. It's a government map, so they look at all the sightings, not only from a sighting perspective, but they also look at from an acoustic perspective, which is a way to detect sounds of whales and dolphins and cetaceans in the underwater, so they can hear them and what's around and what's close by. So it'll definitely be interesting, but I'd love to hear what you think about what these alternative management situations should be, or actions should be. If you DM me at How to Protect the Ocean, that's at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. It's always great to have you here during this Ocean News Day. Tune in and subscribe or follow if you are new to this podcast. And if you think that somebody would like to hear this type of podcast, please feel free to share it just with the link on your favorite podcast app. But until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.